I have access.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. My name is Maria Barnes, and I have been developing in Access for over 20 years now, since about the year 2000. I am a Office Apps and Services MD, concentrating in Microsoft Access for, I think, the last 3 years. And I, on a professional level, I run my own consulting company, do custom software primarily in Access and also SQL Server. I do other things besides that, but those are my main concentrations. I also am the chapter president of another user group, which is a virtual only one called accessusergroups.org, the Lunchtime chapter. So we do a once a month lunch hour Central Time presentation, not in the summer, but during the year. So that's a little bit about me. I live in the Minneapolis area, so it's nice and chilly here. And today the topic is Access versus PowerApps. And I want to start the presentation by putting a little bit of a disclaimer on here. I have lots of experience in Access and not a lot of experience in PowerApps. I have been playing with it for the past couple of years. And we're going to talk a little bit about something that's new called PowerApps for Teams. And I have even less experience in that. It's new. It's like started in November. So what I'm hoping to do today is give you some information about various characteristics of one versus the other, and maybe even if you guys allow that, have a during presentation discussion of some of the items if you want to bring things up or however that works, or we can take questions at the end. But this doesn't have to be just a me talking kind of discussion. So before we start into the actual presentation part, I thought it would be good to cover a couple of more recent announcements from Microsoft in regards to PowerApps. And in particular, the first time I gave this talk, it was the end of November, so they were brand new. Well, we've had a couple months under our belt, so you maybe have already heard these things, but just in case, it's important to know for the discussion here. Why is that not working? There we go. So of course, and now they're all coming up. So one of the announcements is that what was formerly called Common Data Service, or CDS, is now being called Dataverse. So that is a name change. Common Data Service is a data space, if you will, that is kind of the native data that PowerApps was designed for. But you'll see even though it's been 2 months, Microsoft still has a long way to go. I see the word CDS or Common Data Service all over in stuff that I look at online, but it's officially renamed Dataverse, and so we're going to talk about it as Dataverse in this presentation. And then also there is now the general availability of PowerApps within Teams. So it used to be PowerApps was, just an outside on its own thing, but now there is a version of PowerApps within Teams that is not identical, but it's got some real exciting capabilities to it. And so here's a link to that. that announcement for more details. And so during today's presentation, there'll be several places when I'm talking about PowerApps where I'll have some differences noted for the Teams version of it. In a lot of instances, it's cheaper or free, but at this point, it's still new, and therefore there are some limitations to the capabilities of PowerApps within Teams that aren't there in the non-Teams or regular version of PowerApps. Also of note is in the Access roadmap, if you go to, I think I actually have that pulled up. I can show that too. There are 5 items that are on the roadmap for this year, but one of those, and it's actually the first one slotted for this year, is a Dataverse connector from Microsoft Access. So this indicates to us that the Access team is really thinking about integrating more with PowerApps and with Dataverse data in particular from Microsoft Access. So that makes it a good time to start learning more about it if you don't know much about PowerApps, and to certainly think about how the two might be best used for your needs in the future. So what we're going to talk about is characteristics. I'll put the characteristic on the left and then talk about how Access, how it applies to Access and how it applies to PowerApps. The first one is the application type. Access is a desktop application unless you're using something like a remote desktop service. PowerApps can be a desktop application, but it can also be a mobile application. So you will, note, of course, that that's a big plus on the PowerApp side. It's difficult to get Access on a phone or something like that. Much easier to get PowerApps on it. As far as solution type, Access is a file-based solution. You've got an ACCDB or an MDB. PowerApps is a web-based solution. So you are going to have the internet for that, and you're going to have it through some type of browser in general. There are some client-based fronts to it as well. Does it require an internet connection? And here, because of the application type, in general, at least natively, Access does not require an internet connection. Of course, excuse me, that depends a little bit on your data source. If you're connecting to SQL Azure or some other type of data source that requires an internet connection, then your application in Access is not going to run unless you have an internet connection. But the more standard Access setup, where you might have a Access front end on a desktop and a back end on a local file server, you wouldn't typically need an internet connection to run an Access application. PowerApps, however, because it's web-based, yes, natively you do need an internet connection, although there are apparently some offline options. I don't know a lot of details about those, but I imagine you might be able to use more of a kind of read-only option if you needed to access things offline for some purpose in your application. Does it require an additional plan purchase? Access, no. If you've got Microsoft Access, you can use the application. PowerApps, the basic PowerApps does not require an additional plan purchase. But if you use a premium connector, they have different types of connectors that are possible for data, then there is an extra fee for that. And the fees vary, and there's different types of fees. But if you're going to go to premium level, you do have to typically pay some type of a fee. Is it available with a Microsoft 365 business plan? And for Access, that's yes, except for, I believe, what's called the Business Basic plan. And that one does not have Access as part of it. But the rest of the Microsoft 365 business plans do have Access as a part of it. For PowerApps, that is also true, that yes, they come with the Microsoft, I'm sorry, for PowerApps within Teams, that's also true. It comes with the Microsoft 365 business plan, except for there is apparently one version, I believe it's called the apps version, and it has like only a few of the Office products, like Excel Online and that kind of thing. And that one does not have Teams available with it. So it does not have PowerApps for Teams as part of it. Can simple applications be created by a non-IT user? And the intention for both products is yes. A business user, and that's one of the strengths of both of them. A business user that has business knowledge should be able to design at least a simple Access application and a simple PowerApps application. Of course, you and I all know that they can also make a mess of things and then require someone with a little bit more knowledge to fix it. But if they stick to simple things, a non-IT person should be able to do both. Does the product require software installation for each use location? And the answer for Access is yes. You have to have, if you've got an ACCDB file, for example, which is your Access database application, you can copy that and put it on someone else's machine, but if they do not have Microsoft Access installed on their machine, they cannot run that or open that ACCDB file. There is a free runtime option that's relatively easy to install. So they wouldn't necessarily have to have a Microsoft 365 plan for Access, but they do need the Access product in some version installed. And for PowerApps, the answer is maybe. There are some client installs of the PowerApps that is required on things like mobile devices, but on others you just need, or many of the others, you just need a browser of some kind, like on a desktop. Can it display data? Yes, for both of them. Can it add or modify data? Yes, for both of them. So typical CRUD operations, create, update, delete, create, read, update, delete, sorry. Those are available with ease in both products. Can it be multi-user? And the answer to both, again, is yes. And I want to take this opportunity to just state, I think the audience here is probably not new Access users, but if you're going to make Access multi-user, you should separate out your data into a back-end database and make sure that each of your users are using a separate front-end database. That's the way to make Access be multi-user and not get things like data corruption. But PowerApps is inherently web-based, and each person has their own client-facing copy of the application in the browser at one time. Can it store its own data? And the answer for Access is yes. Take a look at the note above, but you can have one Access database that has both the data stored in the tables and the things like that are actually part of the application per se, like the forms, reports, queries, etc., all be in the same database. So you can, store data in that same Access application. For PowerApps, the technical answer is no. The default for a connector, or rather the inherent connector that PowerApps was designed to work with, is called Microsoft Dataverse. It used to be CDS, or Common Data Service, but it's not really a part of PowerApps. In fact, with the free version of the standard PowerApps, that you can't connect, or you can't use Dataverse. So, but you can connect to other types of data, like the free ones are the standard connectors, OneDrive, Excel Online, SharePoint lists, some of those types of things. But you have to pay extra. So obviously it's not part of the Power App itself. In Teams, it looks more like it's together. When you go in and you create a table, it's all part of it. The Dataverse is free in Teams, and so it looks like it's part of the same product, although technically it's not part of PowerApps itself, I don't believe. Relational data, can you do relational data? And I think we talked a little bit about this before the meeting started. Yes, you can definitely do relational data in both, but in Access, you're used to designing tables and having relationships and using the relationship editor to define those relationships and enforce referential integrity. You cannot do that kind of stuff in the same way in Dataverse. So, you can obviously set up two separate tables, and one has an ID field, and you use the ID from one to the other. So you can set up relational data, but it's not as inherently native in PowerApps, or in Dataverse rather, than it is in Access. Access does a much better job at that. Size limit. Access databases are 2 gigabytes per database. So I think that's for ACCDBs. I think MDBs might be different, or maybe you were talking versions. It's been a while. I think maybe since like 2007 anyway, it's been 2 gigabytes. PowerApps, it depends upon the version. For PowerApps within Teams, the Dataverse limit is 2 gigabytes, so same limit. For the standard PowerApps outside of Teams, it depends on the plan type, and it ranges somewhere between 1 and 10 gigabytes, depending upon the plan type that you have. So something to look out for. It is fairly easy to get around the Access size limit by doing things like using linked tables. You can even have one table that you have all by itself in one database if you want, if you're going to design it like that. So you can get around that. I really don't know how the PowerApps for Teams would work. I don't know if you can connect a different Dataverse, in the 2 gigabyte sector. I kind of doubt it, but I think maybe we'll find out more information about that as time goes. You might have to separate things, or change your data source to something like SQL or something if you needed to go larger. I don't know about you, but I don't typically, like with small business, I don't even see small businesses typically using 2 gigabytes. I see them using more like a 500 megabyte file. But I definitely have larger clients that have, great big databases, and we typically move them to SQL long before they get to the 2 gigabyte size. So anyway. Is there a wide variety of data types available? And by data types on this line, I mean things like, strings, integers, those kind of data types. And the answer to both is yes. But you should be aware that Dataverse for Teams right now anyway has more limitations on types of data than the standard Dataverse. So if you've got an application that you've got in regular Dataverse and you're trying to pull it over into Teams or something like that, you might run across some field types that are not yet supported in the Dataverse for Teams. So that's something to watch out for. It definitely does have the basics though, for most applications. Okay, can you connect to outside data? And the answer is yes. I love this feature in Access. When you go to, I think I've got the standard Northwind database up here as a sample. When you go to external data and new data source, you've got all kind of things that you can connect with. You can do file types, you can do different database types, you can do some online sources. Through ODBC, you can set up, even more. One of Access's strong points in my mind is, the variety of data sources that you can connect to. And soon we'll be able to connect to a Dataverse database, data source as well. And PowerApps got even more. There's a wide variety of connectors. You can go online and look under PowerApps data connectors and get a huge list of them. Different products will often publish a connector, that you can make use of, but do be aware that the list of premium level connectors is much higher or much larger, rather, not to mention that it costs, but it's the list of premium connectors is much larger than the list of standard connectors, but there are still a fair number of standard connectors that do not have extra cost associated with them with PowerApps. And there are a few connectors that are premium that you also that are related to another software product you might own or something like that. So you can't connect to that unless you also have a subscription to whatever product that is. But that would be typical or expected anyway. Can you leverage external process automation? And I would say inherently, at least in Access, the answer to that is no. There's probably some things that you could do, some extra code and utilities you could use to do such, but there's not anything natively built into Access to do that. Whereas within PowerApps, they have Power Automate, which used to be called Flow, and you can talk to that and quickly and easily leverage external process automation from the Power App. Is there built-in security? And I'm going to say no for Access with at least for the ACCDB format. MDB used to have the security options that you could set up. With ACCDB, they did away with that. There is a database level password that you can use, but to me, it's not quite useless, but almost so, because then you're giving the same password to all the users so that they can open the database. So it does protect it from external, but it's not really what I would call built-in security. So you have to develop something, to make use of security within Access. PowerApps does have some built-in security, though. It is based on Office 365 user security and also policy configuration. And Teams is, I don't know if I would call it tighter. I would say that it's just a little different because when you design a Power App in Teams, it's local to that team that you're designing it in. So, you know, if you had somebody else from your organization that wasn't in that team, they would be protected from access to that or not have access to that. So that's kind of a built-in security. Does it have a report designer? And with Access, that is yes. It has very nice report designer. I must confess that I still do a lot of reporting by exporting to Excel because I like some of the capabilities of Excel better. But for standard reports, it's super easy and can be really powerful to do reports in Access. For PowerApps, no, it does not have a report designer. You know, you can design screens and display data in different ways in screens. But if you want to do true reporting, then that's typically done through an external source. And the most common, I think, that people use is Power BI to report out of PowerApps. Is it responsive? And by responsive here, I mean, if you have a device that's a different size and shape than another device, does your application adjust to that size? And for Access, I think that that is probably no. There is a user voice out there, and Access team has it marked as planned to make Access more responsive. I am honestly not too sure where that is on their list. Obviously, you didn't see it on the 5 items that they were currently working on. You know, you can also do a fair amount with it if you design a form right, but you really have to work at it, and it's just not going to be as responsive as something like PowerApps is. So PowerApps itself, the regular version of PowerApps, is built to be responsive, but yet they don't yet have that available for Teams. I'm not sure when they're going to get that. I imagine it will be coming, but whether that will be in the next 6 months or, you know, years from now, I don't know what their priority is on that. But as of this point, the Teams version of PowerApps is not fully responsive. Can you do backups? Yep. Access is file-based, so all you have to do is use copy. PowerApps also is easy to do backup. If I have time here today, I will do a little bit of demo from PowerApps itself, but we saw a little bit beforehand. You know, you just do a file save as kind of thing. Not quite the same as Access, but you know, you can accomplish the same thing. Is there automated backups? For Access, the answer to that is no. At least it's not built in, but it is easy to implement that since it's file-based. You know, if you've got it located on a drive someplace and you have some kind of backup for the whole drive that you've got automated, then you're effectively automating a copy or a backup of Access. For PowerApps, there are automated backups that happen with it. So that is built in. You don't have to run your own backups. They do have backup automation as part of it. Can you restore? Yep. For Access, since it's file-based, again, you just use copy. PowerApps, there's an actual restore command where you choose what you want to restore. But so it's the user interface is different, but you can definitely do it. And please feel free to interrupt me if anyone's typing in the chat or has any specific questions or anything like that. Business logic. Can Access do business logic? And can PowerApps? And the answer to both is yes. The difference between the two of them is that typically they do it in a different way. Most business logic in Access is done through VBA. Some of you might use macros, which is fine too. But if you're going to do something like only show certain fields on a form if a certain value holds true for that record, or if you're going to validate a record set before you save it, to make sure that a particular field is filled in, or that the date range is a date range that makes sense, or something like that. You know, typically that would be done through VBA code in Access. PowerApps does not have code per se. You know, there's no like go to code section or anything like that, because it's all web-based. You know, we have a lot more limits as to what can happen. It's client side and all that. So the logic, the business logic, is typically enforced or done through formulas. It's got formulas in certain sections that you can make use of, and they do have, there's a powerful set of formulas that can be used in PowerApps to do functions and different kinds of things. You can filter, and you know, you can run commands through it and that kind of stuff. They can get a little complicated looking, but they look a little bit more like the expression builder in Access, as opposed to actual code. So if you want to do something more complicated in PowerApps, you know, a lot of validation on a particular data set, or something else that to do business logic, you would probably go off to Power Automate to do that, as opposed to doing that within the Power App itself. Can you import data into the application? And with Access, that's definitely yes. Access is super strong at both importing and exporting data. For Power Apps, you can't really do that within the application. You can use connectors to do close to that though. So it's just a little bit different and probably a little less flexible if what you need to do is import data. Can you import the application to a new environment? And the answer for both is yes. Access is file-based, and so all you usually have to do is copy the file over to your new location and make sure they've got the software to run it, and whatever supporting, you know, if you've got your data someplace else, whatever supporting pieces are lined up. But fairly easy to import the application to a new environment. And for Power Apps, the standard Power Apps, it's not obviously quite the same, but it's fairly straightforward to do. You can save the application and then bring it into a new Power App environment. But for Power Apps for Teams right now, they don't have that capability. So if you are going to design an application for one team, I think at this point you have to co-design it for another team. You know, if you want it for two teams, but not for everybody, you know, you need two copies and you need to develop them. You can't just do one and export it and import it into the other. So it may be coming, but I don't know when. Export data, and Access again is terrific at exporting, so definitely can do that. For Dataverse, you can also export typically from Dataverse, the standard Dataverse, but in Dataverse for Teams right now, they do not have that available. So you would probably have to use connectors or something to get data out of Dataverse in Teams. So conclusion, I didn't write a conclusion, like, you know, say it or post it here. because I didn't want to tie it down to a screen. I think that based on the characteristics, you're going to need to make your own conclusion as to whether PowerApps is right for you. In my opinion, I think it has a great user base, especially if you need a mobile app of some sort, or something to run on a tablet, or you have a sales force that's out talking to clients, and using a laptop is not portable enough for the situation. If you've got somebody taking inventory and they're running around a store, that kind of thing, I think that a Power App is probably better than an Access app. If you've got somebody in an office, I like the real estate that I get on my 3 monitors that I have. Maybe you only have 1, but I think that Access is a great way to go for that aspect. Could you still use a Power App in a desktop situation? Absolutely. I'm more familiar with Access, so I would tend to think about it first for a business desktop application. I also think that at least in the near future, that doing some kind of hybrid, and there's certainly ways to do a hybrid application now. If you do something like connect both to SQL Server, then you could right now, design a hybrid application where, say, your office staff had an Access application connected to SQL, and they were running that in the office, and you had some mobile person using a Power App for the part of the application that they needed. Chances are that the business admin team or whatever only needs some of the data that mobile person is getting. And as long as they can share the data, a hybrid application would be a great idea. And I think, the other thing I guess I want to say conclusion-wise, and this is why I didn't write any of this down, because it's just general opinion. I right now, I find Access much easier to work in as far as being a developer. By responsive this time, I mean like how quick the application is to respond. I find because it's web-based, Power Apps and designing something in Power Apps can be slow and feel slower to me and more tedious. And you have to remember to save. I guess you have to remember to save some things in Access too, but Access seems to prompt you better. I definitely totally messed up a Power App before, and of course I don't have as much experience, but that was before I knew about the file save as. So I unglued several hours worth of work at one point, although I used to do that at the early days of Access too, so to be fair. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about here is, yeah, I have links to the roadmap, which I showed you. I have a link to the Lunchtime group, which I am a chapter president of. I did want to make a short plug for our next Lunchtime session. We are actually going to have kind of a follow-up. The topic is Access and PowerApps, a growing relationship. And this presentation is going to be given by Carl Donabauer. I think I pronounced that right. Several of you were talking at the beginning today about the Vienna conference. He's one of the co-leaders of that. So if you attended that, or you may know him for other things, he's been around the Access world for quite some time. Anyway, he's going to give the talk, and he's going to talk about more about Power Apps and show some projects where they complement each other and that kind of thing. So it should be a fun session and interesting. It does get recorded if you can't make it. This one's next Tuesday, and it's at 12 p.m. Central Time. So that's really the end of my formal presentation. I don't know if we want me to stop sharing and us to go back to video mode, or what you want to do at this point. I have more things that I can demo, but I'd rather at least do a Q&A first.
Yeah, let's keep it in screen share mode, Maria, and thank you very much. And let's open it up for audio only questions for recording, and then we'll go on to back to video after we're done recording what we will
Sounds good.
say. But thank you, excellent summary. I have a question for you on the automation and some of the in a box, apparent limitations of access as compared to PowerApps in terms of internet connectivity. But I know that if you use, say, Azure SQL as your backend, which I think more and more Access developers are using, you can use things like logic apps, which is kind of the non-PowerApps version of Flow or Power Automate. So there are, that point number 2, external process automation. So you can, if you're outside of the ACCDB backend, you can do some of the stuff that you can do in PowerApps, I guess.
Yeah, but you're not really doing that from Access.
Exactly.
You're doing that from Azure at that point.
Yes.
But that's a great point. You could still have an Access application that leveraged external process automation, just not directly through the Access application. It would need to be some other thing, like you said, Azure.
The second question I have, I think, although it's less and less common since so many people are moving to Office 365 as opposed to perpetual licenses. But so there is a way of having a user with no license at all use your Access application via, let's say, the runtime. Yep. Is there an equivalent, or is there a way to be a user of a Power App and not have an Office 365 commercial license?
So I'm not positive on that. I think the answer is no, although I think that they do have some things that they've been working on that have to do with external users that are essentially, they call them Power Apps, but I've tried one of them once and it ends up looking like a web-based app instead. So it's very different, but there is an external user type app you can build. And if you build that particular type of app, Power App, then it is usable without a license. And so it's basically deployed then on a website and they get to it like that. But it's my understanding that it's not really a Power App and it's not the same interface. And so it's not like it can be shared with your team and the outside team. The outside team, or if your team, if they want to use it, would have to use the same interface. So I'm not sure if that's a totally accurate answer, but that's my understanding of it anyway.
Thank you. Everybody feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions that you have. I know that Klaus was wondering if the PowerPoint deck would be available.
I can certainly make this available, yes.
Thank you.
I don't know how you typically do that, but I can save this as a PDF. And
cool, yeah. We'd put a download link up on the website.
Okay, yep, I will be happy to do that. And I apologize about the accessusergroups.org and the little logo. That's what I do for those presentations, and this is a redo, so I didn't want to bother to take all that stuff off.
Maria, this is Ed Jaworski.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us that haven't spent too much time with PowerApps, can you do like a really brief demo just so we could get a feel for like what it looks like?
Sure,
If you have
sure.
time for just
and-
a sneak peek at something.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to do with the rest of my time here this evening. But let's go ahead and answer any other questions just about the presentation first, just
Great.
so that if we need to like flip to one of the slides or something, we can do so, and then I'd be happy to do that. What I was going to do is show. Well, I don't want to explain it. I'll just explain it as I do it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, well, as we're demoing some of this other stuff, feel free to just unmute and ask a direct question, or, we can always come back and pull this up as well. All right. So, sorry, I can't see. I'm going to see maybe if I make it just a little bigger, I can still see the tabs here because I have everything on tabs. Okay, so this is the interface with PowerApps within Microsoft Teams. So to get to that, you would go to your Office 365 account, and then you would go and click on the Teams link, and that would bring you here, and then it might bring you to, activity or chat or your Teams or something first. But PowerApps is an option on the Teams. And I think, if I remember, it just showed up there, but you might have to add it if you don't see it. And it is something that they rolled out in November. So I guess it's possible if you have, one of those Office 365s that's like a 6-month channel, you might not see it yet, but I think that it should be available for most people. So that's what it within Teams looks like. And I have to just clarify that you might have the Teams application on your computer because you have joined Teams meetings that someone else has hosted, and you actually end up joining as a guest. Just because you have the Teams application on your computer doesn't mean that you have an actual team you belong to. So when you're creating a Power App, you have to actually create it within a team you belong to. So you can't use like your Microsoft guest account or, something like that. You have to actually, have a team through an Office 365 account and a team associated with that account. And you might belong to several teams, that's fine, but you can't do it without doing it in the context of a particular team. The other thing is I'm going to show you my actual Teams application. So it looks a little similar where you've got your activity and stuff over here, and then one of the apps, and you can add other apps, now, is PowerApps, and then it shows very similar. And it displays, and it looks very similar to what's in the online version. One thing I will warn you about, and again, I've only started playing with Power Apps within Teams. If you're gonna develop an application, at least get it started in the online version. I was really struggling with adding connectors to different data sources. I started in my desktop application of Teams, and I just couldn't get it to work. I would start creating a connection, and then it would pop me over to my web browser, and then there would be nothing there. It was like I had a connector, but no data underneath it. And I finally asked Carl, actually, I said, you know, what am I doing wrong? This is not what it looks like from the standard Power Apps, and I can't figure out, you know, what's going on. And he's like, it doesn't look like that for me. Well, then when he stepped through what he was doing, I was like, you know what, you're on Teams Online. And I tried it from there, and it worked like I would expect it to work. So I would highly encourage you to do, I don't know if I want to say the majority of your development, but at least your initial development on the Teams Online version. I have just done changes and that kind of stuff to a form, for example, in the Teams application, and it was seen to be just fine, but there's something not quite right about it. And then if you're going to standard Power Apps, oops, that is done through, and you type just www.powerapps.com, and then you have to sign in. So you have an actual environment that you set up to store the applications in. But then the interface is a little bit different. You know, you've got different types of options here versus what you see, you know, in Teams. And, you know, this has a home build about, but it's not, there's just not as many things within Teams as there is, you know, within the regular Power Apps environment. In particular, Power Apps, you can do different types of the regular Power Apps. You can do different types of applications like Canvas and Model. Portal is what the external user facing application is called. I don't remember who asked that question earlier, but it's a whole different type of application. And basically, to me, it looks like they're creating a web application. That's what I get the feeling. Because it's no longer like, once it gets like deployed, it's no longer part of the interface. When you are doing editing or after you create, the interface looks a lot different. For example, this is one that I was demoing earlier, and I actually have it pulled up. But you can do things like, if you just click on it, it actually does a play or starts the application. Or you can do edit, and it goes into editing mode. I think this is the one. This is the just playing it and how it works. This is a simple one that I have. It's just based off of one. In here we've got interfaces that we've got a bar along here, and that pops out. You've got a tree view here. We've got some interface up here. This is that function area that I was talking about, where you can do business logic within functions. You can do stuff, for example, this happens to be this edit form, and this is the, see, I clicked off it. Now it's something else. I believe this is the, sorry, clicking different things here. This is the data source for it. So, and you can do things like with the different functions. If you know what you're doing, you can start typing, maybe. you know, and they do have some UI here, or some auto sensory stuff here, where you can get some syntax help with whatever you're doing. But in my head, it's not as easy as Access to me to figure out what's going on and what to do or whatever. I ended up going to like an online source, and there's lots of sources. Where was one of the best places I found that had some help? Oh, like in I think it's even down here though. Yeah, see all this kind of stuff in this Learn area. There's actually a lot of stuff in Learn if you're interested in learning in Microsoft Learn, and it's all free. Most of it is either video based or kind of like a little interactive course. Some of it, I went through the whole set that I could maybe a year ago, and even maybe they've updated some of them, but even at that point, some of it was outdated. They're changing PowerApps so quickly that you know, you might, the video might say to do such and such in order to get this done, and you try that, and there's not even that option or whatever. So you know, it is changing. It might not be totally accurate, but it was still quite helpful to go through some of that stuff. What was I talking about? Oh, for the formulas. To get all the sense of all the formulas, I would just go to like Microsoft documentation and Google Power App formulas, and it's going to give you a whole dictionary of stuff. And I think by even just the list of formulas, you'll have a sense. I mean, they make sense. Filters, that kind of thing. But to inherently know that I need to use filter on something, I found it difficult to know, what to do and how to come up with these things. There wasn't there. I can't find like a really easy. I mean, there are some things, like insert. It's got, different buttons, and here I'm on regular PowerApps here, and there's insert here. In Teams, there's no insert when you're in an app. Like this is one. Okay, let's see if I can. See, I think this interface is different. The other one, when you click on it, it builds it and you're running it right away. Here's where I'm talking about getting things ready. In Access, that would just pop right up, right? And it's got some permissions it needs, because I've got it connected to a couple things. But there's nothing right up here about inserting, right? Well, but if you go like this, then you get the insert stuff. So some of the stuff is not intuitively obvious as far as the difference between the two, but they're fairly similar. You still have the bits over here that, with the two tabs and all different properties and that kind of thing. There is an app checker. So if you start adding new things or changing things, it's really kind of nice. There's hopefully nothing wrong here now, so it won't give me anything, but it pops up here and it will tell you like the number of errors, and then you can it's got accessibility errors. Okay, I don't know what those are in this case. Missing accessible label. Okay, well, it tells you. That's kind of cool. All right, what was I? Thought there was another error of some type. Anyway, so that is very helpful. I have found I've never even noticed the accessibility ones before, but I have found sometimes that I still don't know what it means when it finds an error, but at least it shows you where they're at.
Hey, Maria.
Yeah.
Don't be embarrassed by errors at all. This is the most valuable part for all of us, is seeing how to go about debugging these things.
Really? I know. Yeah, and the other odd thing to me about them is, well, I don't know that it's odd. It's just not, it's not like I'm used to an Access, right? It's much more web-based. For example, this is a Power App that it's just based off an Excel spreadsheet as far as data goes, but it's got kind of the standard multiple item selection, and then if you click on one of them, it opens up a whole new form with that. Well, you can go back by doing this one. You can delete. Everything's read only inherently, and then you have to hit the edit button to edit it. You know, there's a refresh, there's a reorder, there's a search. To add a new one, you do a plus. But, you know, for example, when you're in here and you edit, in order to save changes, you have to hit the submit. You can't just exit, right? Exit actually means cancel, you know, not save. And I think this is all standard of a web-based operation, but if you're used to designing Access applications, you need to think a little bit differently when it comes to things like that. And even just form flow, you know, popping up multiple forms or multiple tabs, it's not going to be the same. It's going to be different in order to do something like that. Any other questions or specific areas you want me to cover more? Do you want to talk about the connectors a little bit, or?
For me, just a question about the forms. So you can build all sorts of forms, especially with the Power Apps, if I understand that correct.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of flexibility and types of forms that you can do. Yes, when you and it depends a bit on which of the interfaces you're in. What you get is a default. But if you were, for example, to, insert a new form, well, that inserts on this one, I'm sorry. There is a undo, yay. Think that I need to go into here and do a new screen, okay. There are default layouts, for example, that it gives you as, you know, options. And if you chose, you know, this sidebar option, then that screen would come pre-built with these various containers and that kind of stuff. But you could also do a blank one and, you know, set things up. It's these containers that help make it be responsive. So that's something that you're really not used to in Access, as far as having, you know, containers that can be resized and stuff like that. Did that answer the question?
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
So Maria, is there any kind of a debugging environment at all? Can you do watches or traces, or is there no need for that?
There probably is a need for that. I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. I have not gotten into it heavy enough to really feel I needed that. I've done more just trial and error. It's got a, you know, a preview button and, you know, try this and this doesn't work, and so try that. And I think part of that is because most of the debugs items I do in Access is debugging code. right? And we don't have code here. So, it would be useful to, if you had functions built in here and you were expecting them to be something and sometimes they weren't, it would be useful probably to do something like that. But so far I haven't done that, and that's probably just because I haven't done enough of them that are complicated enough. I've so far been sticking with some pretty simple applications just because I feel like it's kind of cumbersome as a developer to develop in these so far. But I am getting more interest from people in PowerApps, and I think part of that's the hype that Microsoft's got out there for it. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody here done very many of them?
Yeah, this is George. I did a couple, 3 or 4 years ago when they first came out. And I was basically comparing it to what I could do in Access, what I could do in .NET, and what I could do in PowerApps. And in all 3 cases, I used an Azure SQL backend. And I think, at least at the time in PowerApps, you could either start designing and then define a data set, or you could start building from a data source, and it would kind of build forms for you based on your database.
Yeah, and that's
There
this
it is,
one.
model driven. Yes.
Driven.
Yes.
And there is not that option in Teams at this point.
Right.
But in standard PowerApps, you can get your data source first,
right.
And you can hit this model apps, and it basically does CRUD design.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's very. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say it's similar-ish to the Entity Framework automatic scaffolding that you get in Visual Studio for an MVC app. I had some of I had them running, but there was, again, this is 3.5 years ago, but there was a fair amount of instability. Sometimes the connector wouldn't work, and I'd get a very funky error. And it looks like it's still kind of an issue, but the initial load time to sort of bootstrap I guess the runtime that it has to run in, because it sort of runs in an app container, say on your mobile device. So you start the Power App, and then the container kind of has to load, and that takes, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds. This is 3 years ago. Maybe it's gotten better, but it certainly was not as responsive as either, BAM hitting a web app or hitting an Access application. Also, like you working in text boxes as opposed to rich, Win32 developer designer was a little bit frustrating at times, but probably something you can get used to.
Yeah, and I have heard some things. It takes a long time to load or to move between screens is a common complaint. And I have heard that there are some ways that you can improve that. For example, if you are using as a data source things like a combo box, and you have that same combo box on every screen in your application. Every time you move from screen to screen, it goes out to the data and pulls that source and then comes back. And there are tricks you can do, like there's like a memory area where you can load that data up on just initial startup and then make use of that on all of your, if it's a constant source and it's not something that's changing, make use of that on all your forms, and you get, more responsiveness as far as speed goes. So there are some tricks like that you can use in some cases to make it quicker. But just the fact that you're web-based to begin with, I've also got people complaining about SQL Azure backends, right? From Access. They're like, oh, I want a SQL Azure backend because now my office is remote. We got the pandemic going on and everybody's remote. We did 3 or 4 of those this year. And then, they don't understand why things are not, as instantaneous when they go from form to form. Well, they're going across the internet now to get their data, So anyway.
Yeah, one thing we found is putting the Access front end in an Azure VM makes the experience scream, and it also gives you like iPad support at the same time.
Yeah, because then the only thing that you are going across the internet for is your screen display and your UI, like what you're typing.
Yeah.
Which is slow anyway. The human's way slower than the internet is. But yeah, saying I use Citrix for some of my, just more of a big company applications for exactly the same reason, right?
Well, thank you. Any more questions for Maria?
Yeah, I have one. Has anyone some experience with Blazor compared to PowerApps?
From a dev side, a little bit I do. For anybody who doesn't know, Blazor is basically Microsoft's effort to generate kind of client-side JavaScript-driven web apps from .NET. It uses a DLL to basically handle the mapping of C# or VB.NET to JavaScript, so that somebody familiar with .NET doesn't have to write JavaScript. I think the from what I understand a little is that the user experience is much better in terms of speed in Blazor. The framework in terms of integration with other data sources is much better in PowerApps. That's the extent of my knowledge. Maybe somebody else has more knowledge there.
Thanks. I think that Blazor is better suited for people who wrote Access applications to change, because Blazor is also database driven normally.
Yeah. Have you done, do you use VB.NET for that?
I'm just beginning to learn it. That's my problem.
All right.
But not VB, but C#.
Okay, so you're going C#. Gotcha.
Yeah, I think VB.NET is dead, or rather dead.
Okay. Great. Well, any other questions for Maria? Maria, thank you so much. I want to put in a second to your plug for your lunchtime group and for Carl Donabauer for his presentation. If y'all haven't seen Carl present, he's great, very knowledgeable, a lot of fun, very funny guy, and really knowledgeable, and really, if you want to kind of take what the great work Maria has done here and kind of go in more of a technical drill down on PowerApps, definitely check that out. Maria, I think if I'm not mistaken, with the Access web apps, if you sign up, then you automatically get notification emails when the next meeting is for the group. Is that true?
It's not Access web apps. It's accessusersgroup.org.
Sorry, thank you.
But yeah, there's a sign up, I think, on the home page, the register. And we actually, for the users group, has different chapters. So if you're interested in one chapter versus the other, you need to sign up for each chapter. But if you register, then you get a monthly notification and an invitation to the meeting. The meetings are open to anybody. So all you have to do is come, to the website, and you can get a link here on a couple of the different pages, to join the meeting, but signing up for it will get you an email on the email list.